and welcome back to the House of Hammer, the Hammer Horror and Order series here on the All American Spook Show podcast YouTube channel. I'm Josh, and I'm joined here with Tiana
Hey.
and the Professor Smoke.
What's up?
And this month we're headed back to 1963, and I think this is the last one that we'll do from Hammer in 1963, because after this, 1964 and beyond. So basically, if you haven't watched this series before, we're watching the Hammer Films horror and thriller releases in the order in which they were released. And like I said, we've worked our way up to 1963. So we're talking about The Old Dark House that was released here in the United States on Halloween of 1963. And this is the first time I've seen this one. Have either of you watched this one before now?
No. First time watch for this one, but we've both seen the original Old Dark House that Universal Pictures did, that James Whale directed and Boris Karloff starred in, which this is a remake of sorts of.
Yeah. Now this is also based on, and that was too based on a novel called Benighted that came out in 1927 by J.B. Priestley.
Yeah. Now that I have not read, and that's why I say somewhat a remake, right? Because they're splitting here. Some people will claim that if there was a novel or some pre-existing thing that two different movies came from, that the second movie wouldn't necessarily be a remake. But sometimes that's the case, and sometimes not, maybe. But I mean,
now from what I gathered, they changed the original movie quite a bit from the original novel back then in 1932. So I would imagine they just butchered this from that.
This movie's even not totally different. Yeah, you haven't seen that one from 32 or 3, whichever one.
I think that one's more of a black comedy, right? There's still that comedy bit to it, but that one's maybe a little bit more serious than this one.
Yeah, it's got those humorous kind of elements, but certainly not as much as in this one. And apparently, we'll maybe get into this a little bit later in this episode, but there's an American version of this movie that was black and white. The British version was shot in Technicolor. I mean, they were both shot at the same time. I guess one in black and white. For whatever reason, I don't know the reason why the American was black and white, but the British one, they went with the Technicolor one. And they also apparently what I was reading, they chopped out even more of the humor, some of the humor from that British version. And I know the version that all of us watched was that Technicolor British version. So it'd be interesting to see the American black and white version with some different scenes, I guess, that weren't cut from it. Although I thought it was a lot of humor anyways. But
yeah, I mean, of course, but I'd have to see some kind of side-by-side comparison type of thing, or watch it immediately afterwards, because it's weird, too, that you mentioned that, too, because, like, this movie released in 1963 here in the United States. They held off on it for 3 full years before they released it in the UK, because at the time it was so poorly received. And apparently, from what I read, is that it sounded like even the people that were involved, specifically William Castle, who directed this, right? And he was just a director on it, but also the people that were involved, I think James Carreras and all that on the Hammer side, once they shot it and put it all together, they were all kind of disappointed in it.
Yeah, maybe that's, and like I said, I didn't go into it too deep, and maybe that's why. Maybe they saw maybe the reaction wasn't so great in the U.S., and maybe they thought they needed to trim out some of the more excessive humor, even though it still comes off very humorous in that British version.
Me, the whole time, I mean, like, look, the movie stars Tom Poston. It also has Robert Morley and Janette Scott, who Janette Scott was in Paranoiac that we talked about a few months ago here on this series. So you can go back and check that one out. And she was in the Day of the Triffids. Isn't that the name of the movie? She was in that one. But
yeah, that's a great classic sci-fi horror.
I think Tom Poston does a fine enough job in this, but the whole time I'm sitting there watching it, like, this is almost in some ways tailor-made for somebody like Don Knotts. You put Don Knotts in this thing, tell me it would not have been better.
Now, if you wanted to go straight, pure slapstick, that would have been a good call.
Of course, he's not doing it as slapsticky as Don Knotts would have, but you take, like, elements of The Ghost and Mr. Chicken and slam it with this. I think it's a way better movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was some of the criticisms, right, was his role in the movie was kind of flat. His character.
I think he's fine enough. He's not the problem I have with it. I mean, honestly, I don't know what the problem is I have with this. I can't peg one thing and say, like, this is the reason I didn't like it as much as I should have. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it's not something I would watch over and over again. That's for sure.
No, no. I wouldn't mind seeing that American version, the black and white one, just to see, one time what it was like.
I have a low bar of expectation just from everything I've read. It doesn't sound like that's probably any better. But I mean, I'd like to see it for myself maybe one of these days. But I think there's enough here to enjoy. Just it's definitely not top notch for everything that we watched in this series so far. Yeah, you can say that at least.
I'm also wondering if maybe the black and white thing, again, I'm speculating because I don't know for sure, but maybe it was shot in Technicolor complete, and then because of William Castle, I mean, prior to this, he'd done The Tingler, and he had done House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts, and maybe he was just fond of that black and white look.
Yeah.
And decided to turn it to, process it black and white instead of the Technicolor process. I'm just kind of speculating.
And you said it was released in the U.S. black and white?
Mm-hmm.
So 3 years later, by the time it comes out in the UK, maybe that's just the way it had to be presented in color, because by 1966, everything is in color, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's just something that had to be done by that point. I don't know. I mean, one interesting thing I did see. Did you notice that the little animated credits at the beginning? Who did that?
Yeah, I did.
That was Adams, right? The dude that made the Adams family. I'm blanking on his first name for some reason. It is pretty cool though. How it's like, just the artwork is cool and everything, and then you see like a hairy beast hand come onto the screen and do his paint his signature or whatever. So that was pretty cool. Honestly, I mean, like, I know we always joke about the credits. That probably was one of the cooler parts of the movie. It's like, oh, that.
Yeah.
Good. Then it's kind of all slightly downhill from there.
Yeah. When you think about it, Hammer does a lot of. I mean, I know this is sort of a Hammer production, even though it's William Castle directing it. So
it's more Castle than Hammer.
That intro and stuff, yeah. Or you mean the movie in general? Yeah, the whole thing. Definitely
more Castle than Hammer. It makes sense. He directed it. Hammer helped produce it because apparently it was something to do with it was cheaper to make it. They were going to do it in the UK or something already, and it was cheaper for them to kind of hook up and do it at Bray Studios. Because the connecting threads here, if you're wondering what connects Castle and Hammer, was Columbia Pictures at the time.
Oh.
That's what brought this all together. So I think to me it leans more Castle than Hammer.
True, yeah. And it won't be the only time that we see Hammer collaborating with somebody else, because somewhere down the road, I think when we get to the 70s, they collaborate with the Shaw Brothers studio.
Oh yeah. That should be interesting.
Yeah.
And I do believe though that this is the first and only. I could be wrong, but I think this is the only time William Castle and Hammer.
I believe so. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that either, but I think so. I didn't even really know about this one, honestly. I didn't know about this until you said, we're doing Hammer Horror and Order, and when you got to this one, I didn't even. I mean, maybe in the back of my head I'd read something. I'm sure I'd read it in that horror encyclopedia maybe back in the day, but totally went out of the mind after that, and I'd never seen it, so I pushed it out of my mind that there was even a Hammer William Castle production at all.
This movie is interesting in the way that we were talking about Charles Adams, Munsters, Adams Family, all that stuff. It's kind of like that in a way, right? Like, this is this family that lives in this house. Honestly, we don't want to explain too much about this movie because I think it would give too much away.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth a view at least once to kind of see how this thing plays out. And there's a couple twists and all that stuff, but just it being called The Old Dark House and just what you see of it, you think it's one kind of movie, and then it's actually a different type of movie than you think. That's right.
Yeah, a lot of quirky characters.
That's what I mean, like the Addams Family kind of thing. Like this family is kind of like the Addams Family in a way.
Yeah, they're definitely not your normal, average, everyday family, right?
No, of course not. And they've got these reasons they're acting weird. Well, maybe not the acting weird part, but they're just weird people that have to be in this position. Yeah,
and it kind of comes across. It reminds me a little bit in the William Castle movie, of course, but House on Haunted Hill. You have a group of people in a house. Now, the House on Haunted Hill is a haunted house, or supposedly haunted house, right? And in this one, you have a family who's in the house trying to stick it out for an inheritance, right? So that they get the inheritance and they split it between them. Things are going on, and so similar like that, quirky characters. Now probably less humor in House on Haunted. I mean, there's a lot of humor, but the humor pays off more in House on Haunted Hill than this movie, I think. I mean, it's less. It's more black comedy in that movie.
Yeah, which what I assume would be compared more to that original, The Old Dark House.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
We came together beforehand, and we ended up giving it 2.5 hammers, which for us, so far out of the stuff that we've watched, puts it on par with the Quatermass Experiment, the Snorkel, Hell is a City, the Shadow of the Cat, that type of stuff. So there's some entertainment value there. It's just not top notch hammer. It's kind of mid level hammer at best, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I got a feeling there's some people out there that would hammer us, no pun intended, on putting Quatermass that low. I mean, granted, it's the first one, and it falls there, but it gets better the next time we come across Quatermass.
And there might be something one of these days when we finally like wrap this whole series up, and in the year 2035, maybe we can look back and say, well, you know what, maybe
kind of re-rate a few of them based on. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Because for most of us, probably it's the first time we've seen some of these. I mean, I think most of us have seen a lot of the more known Hammer films, such as the Frankensteins and the Draculas and the Mummies and those types, and the werewolf ones and whatnot. But some of these other ones like this one, and more than a handful. In fact, once we get to the end of this, I'm sure the ratio is going to be that I've seen less Hammer films than I realized. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, only a fraction of all of the ones that they've made. So yeah, it's hard to rate these. Like watching a movie for the first time and then coming up with a critique of it and rating it. Then you watch it later on down the road, you may like it or you may like it less, so
yeah.
Once by the time we get to the end of this Hammer, we maybe have seen some of these more than once possibly. And like I wouldn't mind going back and revisiting Quatermass and some of those other,
Yeah, some of those early titles. And I'm sure that's something we'll probably get around to, like once we're kind of wrapping it up, to kind of look back and see what we thought, and maybe there's a few of these that you want to watch again, kind of thing. But yeah, but for that, for this month, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Next month, we're going to be heading back to the thriller side of the ledger, because we're doing the horror films and thrillers that Hammer released, and we're going back to the thriller side of the column there with Nightmare from 1964, and this is another one that I have not seen, and it looks like it's another one that doesn't have the usual cast of characters. No Peter Cushing, no Christopher Lee. None of those, but it is written by Jimmy Sangster, so, who is a familiar name with a lot of these movies that we watch in the series so far. So,
yeah, and not sure if I've seen it yet or not. I might have. I've seen some of these thrillers, and I didn't realize the names until I come across and watch them again. I'm like, okay, I kind of remember this one vaguely. So I don't know if I've seen Nightmare yet, but I'll.
Yeah, and I don't see like an alternate title, because a lot of these, were released in the UK as one title versus here, right?
Yes,
so
true,
sometimes, yeah. It's more well known for this title versus that one, but I don't see an alternate title for this one. So I've definitely not seen this. So that's always interesting when we get a first time pull. So for Donnie and Will, who couldn't be with us, that's Tiana and the Professor Smoke. I'm Josh. We are the All American Spook Show podcast, which you can listen to every Monday at 6 p.m. East, right here on the YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we encourage you to subscribe, like, and all that jazz, and stick around here to the YouTube channel for all the other series that we have, including Video Vortex and Grindhouse Gutter. So go check those out, and we appreciate you watching.